I've been a doctor for over 30 years. I've seen life begin and I've seen it end, more times than I can count. I thought I understood the finality of it, the silence after the last breath. I thought I knew what death was. Then my 88-year-old patient died on my watch, and what he told me when he came back shattered everything I thought I knew. His name was Mr. Samuels. He wasn't just a name on a chart to me. He was a kind, gentle soul with a heart that was, to put it simply, just worn out. He'd lived a full life. He'd tell me stories about his wife, his kids. He was ready, or so we all thought. That night, the air in the hospital was still and heavy, the kind of quiet you only get at 3 a.m. I was at the nurse's station, looking over some paperwork, when the sound every doctor dreads ripped through the silence. The high-pitched, frantic scream of a heart monitor. Room 314. Mr. Samuels. My own heart jumped into my throat. It's a feeling that never goes away no matter how many times you experience it. A mix of adrenaline and a cold, sinking dread. We ran. The whole team descended on that room like a wave. It was organized chaos. Shouts for meds. The hiss of the oxygen, the rhythmic, brutal thud of chest compressions. We were fighting, but I could see it in the monitor. We were losing. Before that night, before Mr. Samuels, my life had become a kind of flatline of its own. It was a perfectly predictable rhythm, but there was no pulse. My alarm would go off at 5 a.m. The coffee tasted the same every morning. The drive to the hospital was the same route, past the same houses. For years, the hospital had been my calling, but somewhere along the way it had turned into just a building, a place of charts and beeping machines. I was a mechanic for the human body. I'd patch people up, send them on their way, and try not to think too hard about the ones I couldn't fix. I was a man of science. I believed in what I could see, what I could measure, blood pressure, oxygen levels, lab results. That was my reality, my religion. If it didn't show up on a scan or in a test tube, it wasn't real, and I was good at it. I could diagnose a complex case from across the room just by the look on a patient's face. But that skill, that cold, hard logic, it came at a price. It had hollowed me out. The spark that made me want to heal people in the first place had been smothered under 30 years of long nights, paperwork, and loss. And I dragged that emptiness home with me every night. My wife, Sarah, she tried. Lord, she tried. She'd look at me across the dinner table, her eyes full of concern, and ask how my day was. And I'd give her the same answer. Fine. The usual. But she knew. She could see the ghost behind my eyes. She thought it was just burnout, the stress of the job. But she didn't know the real question that was eating me alive, the one I was too afraid to even say out loud. What was the point? I was just delaying the inevitable for everyone, including myself. That night was no different. I was sitting at the nurse's station at 3 a.m., the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the smell of antiseptic hanging in the air. I was just going through the motions, signing off on charts, my mind a million miles away. Just another shift, just another night. I remember looking up at the clock on the wall, thinking about how many more hours I had to get through before I could go home to my quiet, empty-feeling house. I felt a familiar, heavy ache in my chest. Not a medical one. It was something else. A profound loneliness. But what happened next was more than just a medical emergency. It was an answer to a question I didn't even know I was asking. Looking back, the signs were all there. Not like flashing neon signs, of course. They were quieter. Little whispers in the background of a very loud, very sterile world. And my rationale, scientific mind was an expert at ignoring whispers. Earlier that day, during my rounds, Mr. Samuels had been different. Usually he was full of stories, his voice a little weak but still warm. That afternoon he was quiet, peaceful. He was looking out the window at the gray city sky, and when I came in, he didn't startle. He just turned his head slowly and gave me this small, knowing smile. His eyes, they weren't the cloudy eyes of an 88-year-old man with a failing heart. They were clear, incredibly clear. "It's a quiet day, isn't it, Doc?" he'd said, his voice barely a murmur. I agreed, making a note on his chart. Then he added something I didn't write down. "The silence is coming. But don't you worry. It's not an ending. It's just the space between the notes." I patted his shoulder, gave him a reassuring smile, and dismissed it. The ramblings of a tired mind. But the look in his eyes, that stayed with me. It was a look of absolute certainty. He knew something I didn't. That was the first sign. The second one came just minutes before the alarm. I was at the station and the main overhead light, the big rectangular fluorescent one, flickered. But it wasn't a normal flicker. It went out completely. For a full 3 seconds, the entire corridor was plunged into a strange, milky darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the monitors. Then, with a soft buzz, it came back on. One of the night nurses, a young woman named Chloe, just shook her head. "This place is falling apart," she muttered. We both laughed it off. A power surge, a faulty ballast. There were a dozen logical explanations. But the sudden cold that washed over me in that brief moment of darkness, there was no explanation for that. But what happened right after was even stranger. I picked up Mr. Samuel's chart again just to double-check his latest blood work. And as my fingers touched the cold plastic of the clipboard, I felt a jolt. It was like a static shock, but not. It wasn't painful, it was a feeling. A sudden overwhelming wave of sadness. It wasn't my sadness, it felt borrowed. It was so intense I actually pulled my hand back and looked down at the chart, as if it were radioactive. My heart started pounding in my chest, a frantic, nervous rhythm. I looked up, down the empty, silent hallway. Nothing. It was just me, Chloe, and the hum of the machines. I told myself it was exhaustion. Too much caffeine. The stress of the job finally getting to me. I was a doctor. I dealt in facts and data, in what could be proven. A weird feeling? That didn't belong in my world. I took a deep breath, forcing the logic back in, pushing the feeling down. And that's when the sound ripped through the silence. The high-pitched, frantic scream of a heart monitor. Room 314. In that split second before my body even moved, I knew. The look in his eyes, the flickering light, the jolt of sadness. They weren't random events, they were a countdown. And the clock had just hit 0. We ran. There's no other word for it. The sound of sneakers squeaking on polished linoleum, the frantic rustle of scrubs, a symphony of impending loss. We burst into room 314, and the scene was exactly what I dreaded. Mr. Samuels was lying still, his face pale and slack against the white pillow. Chloe was already there, her knuckles white as she started compressions. The air was electric with a terrible, focused energy. I took my place at the head of the bed. The training kicks in. It's automatic. A checklist of life-saving measures you run through in your head while your heart is trying to beat its way out of your chest. One of epi now. My voice was loud, commanding. It didn't sound like my own. The paddles were in my hands. The cold, hard plastic felt alien, charging, clear. The body on the bed gave a sickening jolt. Nothing. The flat line on the monitor didn't even flicker. It just stared back at me, a single, unwavering, horizontal line of accusation. But my mind wasn't entirely there. A part of me, the part that had felt that jolt of sadness, was somewhere else. As I worked, shouting orders, pushing drugs, shocking a heart that refused to listen, I kept seeing his face from that afternoon. The look in his eyes, the small, peaceful smile. The silence is coming, but don't you worry. The words echoed in my head, a ghostly counterpoint to the frantic beeping of the machines and the shouts of my team. Was this it? Was this the silence he was talking about? It didn't feel peaceful. It felt violent. It felt like a theft. We fought for 23 minutes. 23 minutes that felt like an eternity in an instant all at once. Every second was a battle. Every compression was a prayer. Every dose of epinephrine was a desperate plea. But the line on the monitor never changed. It was a stubborn, final answer to all our questions. The energy in the room started to shift. The frantic hope was draining away, replaced by a heavy, grim acceptance. I saw it in Chloe's eyes as she tired, sweat beading on her forehead. I saw it in the slump of the respiratory therapist's shoulders. I looked down at Mr. Samuels, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see a patient. I didn't see a set of failing vitals. I saw the man who told me about the fishing trips he took with his son. The man whose face lit up when he talked about the dress his wife wore on their first date. He was gone. The vessel was there, but the light, the spark that made him him, it had been extinguished. My last thought before I spoke wasn't about medicine. It wasn't about protocol. It was a single, crushing thought. I'm sorry, I couldn't keep you here. I took a deep breath, and the smell of ozone from the paddles filled my lungs. I nodded to Chloe. She could stop. It was over. The words felt like gravel in my throat. Okay, everyone. That's it. I looked at the clock on the wall, its red digital numbers burning into my memory. Time of death, 3:37 a.m. And then, the silence. The real silence. A nurse reached over, and with a single press of a button, the piercing drone of the flatline monitor was gone. The quiet that flooded the room was absolute. It was heavier than grief. It was the sound of a universe that had one less soul in it. The team started to file out, their movements slow, their faces drawn. They left me alone with him, alone in the quiet. It was the loudest silence I had ever heard. I had failed. Science had failed. But as I stood there in that deafening stillness, a part of me wondered if this wasn't a failure at all, but an arrival. The space between the notes, he'd called it. We were in it now. And I was about to find out it wasn't empty at all. I stood there in the silence, my hand resting on his. It was already cooling. A final, small gesture of connection. A goodbye. I leaned in close, the smell of antiseptic and defeat thick in the air, and I whispered it, more to myself than to him. Rest in peace, my friend. And that's when it happened. A squeeze. It was faint, so faint I thought I'd imagined it. A muscle spasm, a final reflexive twitch of a dying nerve. That's what my brain, my 30 years of medical training, screamed at me. But my heart stopped. I stared down at my hand, at my fingers intertwined with his, and I felt it again. Stronger this time. A definite, deliberate pressure. My own breath hitched in my throat. I looked up from our hands to his face, and Mr. Samuel's eyes opened. They weren't cloudy or unfocused, they were crystal clear, and they were looking right at me. A low, raspy sound came from his throat, a voice crawling its way back from an impossible distance. He told me later what happened in those 23 minutes. He told me everything. Now, what he described, it wasn't the violent, chaotic fight we were having in that room. For him, it was the opposite. He said it didn't hurt. There was no final, agonizing moment. It was more like a release, a gentle letting go. He told me he felt a strange, low hum inside his chest, and then a feeling like he was floating in warm water. He said he was suddenly up, near the ceiling in the corner of the room. He could see everything. He saw his own body on the bed, pale and still. He saw Chloe, her face strained, her arms pumping rhythmically. He saw me shouting orders, my expression a mask of grim determination. He told me he could see the panic and the sadness in our eyes, but he couldn't feel it. All he felt was a profound, overwhelming peace. The pain in his joints, the tightness in his chest he'd lived with for years, it was just gone. He said it was like taking off a heavy, wet coat you didn't even know you were wearing. He wasn't scared. That's the part that gets me. See, he wasn't scared at all. He said he was just curious. He watched us work like a spectator at a play he already knew the ending to. He felt a gentle pull, a soft tug away from the room, away from the frantic scene below. He said he turned from us and saw not a tunnel, not a gate, but just a warmth. A light that wasn't bright or blinding, but soft and welcoming, like the light of a sunrise. It felt like home. He started to move toward it. He wanted to go. But as he took what he described as a step, a voice, clear and calm, spoke in his mind. It wasn't a voice he heard with his ears, but one he felt in his very being. The voice was kind but firm. It said, "Not yet. It's not your time." He told me he felt a sense of confusion. He was ready. He was at peace. Why not? And the voice answered the question in his mind. The doctor. He needs to know. Go back. Tell him. That's when he felt a jolt, like being pulled backward with incredible speed. The warmth faded, the peace was replaced by the cold of the room, and the pain rushed back into his body. The first thing he felt was my hand holding his. The first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was me, leaning over him, my face a picture of pure, unadulterated shock. What do you do when your entire reality is turned upside down by a dead man's story? Subscribe and hit that bell, because in the next video, I'm going to tell you the rest of the message he brought back for me and how it changed my life forever. You won't want to miss it. Over the next few days, as Mr. Samuels got stronger, he told me what happened. We'd sit in his room, the afternoon sun streaming through the window. And the beeping machines that once sounded like a countdown to death now just felt like background noise. His voice was quiet, steady, and he'd look at me with those impossibly clear eyes as he described the 23 minutes he was gone. He told me there was no pain, no struggle. It was like slipping into a warm bath. He remembered seeing us, a frantic knot of blue scrubs working on the shell he'd left on the bed. But he wasn't in the room anymore. He was everywhere. He said the first thing he noticed wasn't a light, but a sound, a low, beautiful hum. He said it was like the chord 1,000 cellos might play, and that single note was pure, unconditional love. It wasn't just a sound he heard. It was a feeling that held him, that told him he was home and that everything, absolutely everything, was okay. The space he was in had no walls, no ceiling, no floor. It was just color. But not colors like we see them. He tried to explain it to me. He said it was like seeing the feeling of joy as a shimmering gold, or the idea of peace as a deep, pulsing indigo. The air itself was alive, breathing with a light that came from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It didn't cast shadows. It illuminated everything from the inside out. He felt weightless, formless, but more himself than he had ever been in his 88 years. Then he told me he saw his life. But it wasn't like a movie. There were no scenes playing out in order. It was all at once. He didn't just see the day he married his wife. He felt the love in that chapel from her perspective, from his parents' perspective. From the perspective of the sunbeam that hit the stained glass window at that exact moment. He felt the ripple effect of every small kindness he'd ever done. He felt the pain he'd caused, too. Not as a judgment, but as a lesson. He felt the sting of a harsh word he'd said to his son in 1978, and he understood the boy's hurt perfectly. There was no guilt, no shame. Just a profound, crystal-clear understanding of connection. It was all one big, intricate tapestry, and his life was a single, beautiful thread woven through it all. He wasn't alone. He told me there were presences. He couldn't describe them as people or angels. They were more like pillars of warm, conscious light. They didn't speak with mouths, but he understood them perfectly. Their thoughts flowed into him like a river. They were ancient and kind, and their love was the very fabric of that place. They showed him that his wife, who had passed years earlier, was part of this light now. He didn't see her face, but he felt her presence, her specific, wonderful love, as a shimmering thread of silver within the golden hum. He was home. He felt a gentle pull, a current in this ocean of light, drawing him deeper, towards a brilliance that was even greater, a frontier that felt like the final step. He told me he wanted to go. He was ready. He was more than ready. He was eager. But as he moved toward it, one of the presences communicated with him, the thought clearer than any spoken word. It is not your time. There is one more thing you must do. He felt a sense of confusion. His work was done. His body was broken. What else could there be? And the presence showed him an image, not on a screen, but in his mind. It was my face. He saw me, not just at his bedside, but at the nurse's station, my shoulders slumped, the exhaustion in my eyes. He felt the hollowness I carried inside me, the question that was eating me alive. He felt my despair, and he understood. The message wasn't for him. He was just the messenger. The presences told him that, "Doctor, he has forgotten why he is here. He needs a sign. Go back. Tell him he is the one who will save you." He said in that moment he understood the beautiful irony of it. I had to save his physical body so he could come back and save my soul. He told me, he argued, not with words, but with his entire being. He sent a feeling of protest back to the presences of light. Why me? I'm tired. I'm ready. He could feel the final, beautiful brilliance just ahead of him. It was a promise of an end to all striving, emerging with that perfect, unconditional love. To turn away from that, it was like being asked to walk out of the warmest home you've ever known, back into a freezing, violent storm. Every part of his soul wanted to just let go, to take that final step. But the message came again, this time with a force that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just a thought. It was an infusion of pure understanding that flooded him. He is lost, the presence communicated, a feeling of deep compassion washing over him. He heals bodies, but his own spirit is broken. You are his sign. You must go back and you must tell him this. You saved my life so I could save yours. And in that instant, Mr. Samuels told me, he saw it all. The perfect, beautiful symmetry of it. The cosmic joke. The profound truth. It wasn't a choice anymore. It was a mission. He described the return as the exact opposite of his death. It wasn't a gentle release, it was a violent recall. It felt like being hooked by the soul and reeled back at an impossible speed. The shimmering colors of that place collapsed into a single point of darkness. The beautiful cello-like hum of love was ripped away, replaced by a deafening roar, like wind rushing past his ears. The warmth vanished, and a deep, penetrating cold seized him. He said it was the most agonizing loneliness he had ever felt, being torn away from that connection, from that feeling of being home. And then, slam, he was back. The impact was brutal. Pain erupted everywhere at once in his chest, his joints, his very bones. He could feel the crushing weight of his own body, the scratchy hospital sheets against his skin, the cold, sterile air in his lungs. It was a prison after the freedom he'd just known. The first physical sensation he registered was another person's touch, a warm, firm hand holding his. He fought through the static and the pain, forcing his heavy eyelids to open. The first thing he saw was my face, inches from his, my eyes full of a grief and shock that he now understood completely. So he did what he was sent back to do. He used the very first breath of his new life to deliver his message. Now I have to ask you, if you were him, having felt that perfect peace, would you have come back? Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because stories like this are a reminder that there's more to our world than what we can see. And I have a few more I think you need to hear. I just stared at him, my mind a blank slate wiped clean by his words. You saved my life so I could save yours. And then, as if the effort of delivering that one sentence had drained every last bit of impossible energy from him, his eyes rolled back and he slumped against the pillow. But he wasn't gone. On the monitor, the flat line was gone too. In its place was a beep, a slow, steady, unbelievable rhythm, the sound of life. The team came flooding back into the room, drawn by the sudden change on the central monitors. Their faces were a gallery of shock. They saw a living patient where moments before there was a dead man. They didn't hear what I heard. They didn't know. They immediately started talking, their voices a nervous buzz of medical jargon. spontaneous return of circulation, Lazarus phenomenon. They were looking for a label, a box to put this in, a scientific life raft to cling to in an ocean of the unexplainable. But I knew this wasn't a phenomenon, it was a delivery. The next few hours were a blur. Mr. Samuels was stabilized and moved to the ICU. His family arrived, a frantic daughter and a stunned, silent son. When they saw him, alive and breathing, they collapsed in tears of joy. They hugged me, called me a hero, called it a miracle from God. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. How could I tell them? How could I explain that I was just a cog in a machine I couldn't begin to comprehend? My chief of staff, a man who believed in nothing he couldn't publish in a medical journal, pulled me aside. He called it an anomalous clinical event and said we needed to write a paper on it. He saw a career opportunity. I saw the face of God. We were looking at the same thing, but we were living in different universes. But the hardest part of it all was watching Mr. Samuels. As he slowly regained his strength over the next few days, it became clear that while his body had come back, a part of his soul was still over there. The joy his family felt wasn't reflected in his eyes. Instead, there was a deep, profound sadness, a homesickness for a home none of us could even imagine. He'd complain about things he never noticed before. The scratchy hospital sheets, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the ache in his bones. It was like a world traveler being forced to live in a gray, windowless room after seeing the most beautiful landscapes in the universe. He was physically present, but his spirit was aching for the place it had been torn away from. One night, a week later, I was doing my rounds and found him awake, just staring out his window at the dark city skyline. He didn't seem to notice me at first. I stood in the doorway, watching him. He looked so frail against the vast darkness outside. Finally, he turned his head and his eyes found mine. There were tears in them. "It's so loud here, Doc," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Even the silence is loud." There, the silence was full. It was made of love. This quiet is just empty. And in that moment, hearing him describe the place he'd been, I realized he was also describing the life I'd been living. Empty. Something inside me broke. Or maybe it was fixed. The wall I had built around my heart for 30 years, the one that kept me safe from grief and loss, it just crumbled. I walked over and sat on the edge of his bed. I didn't say anything. I just sat with him, two castaways in the quiet, empty dark. And for the first time in my career, I wasn't his doctor. I was his student. The man of science was gone, replaced by a man who was finally, desperately ready to believe. That night I went home, and for the first time in years, when my wife Sarah asked me how my day was, I didn't say fine. I looked at her, really looked at her, and said something happened. Something I can't explain. The look of surprise and hope on her face told me that my own resurrection had already begun. When the entire world is offering you a logical explanation, but one man's whisper has shown you the face of a miracle, who are you supposed to believe? Subscribe and hit the notification bell, because what Mr. Samuels taught me in the following weeks wasn't about medicine, but about life itself. And those are lessons you need to hear. That night, sitting by Mr. Samuels' bed, was the beginning. The man of science in me didn't just die. He was integrated. He was put in his proper place as a tool, not a master. I went home and told Sarah everything. I didn't hold back. I told her about the flat line, the squeeze of his hand, the impossible words he whispered. I told her about the hollowness I'd been carrying for years. I laid it all out on our kitchen table, my voice raw, my hands shaking. She didn't interrupt, or she just listened, her eyes searching mine. When I was finished, a tear rolled down her cheek, but she was smiling. "I knew you were still in there," she said, taking my hand. "I'm just so glad you found your way back." The hospital became a different place for me. It was no longer a building of sickness and charts. It was a place of stories, a place of transition. I started to listen differently. Before, I'd listen for symptoms, for clues to a diagnosis. Now I listened for the whispers. I'd sit with a patient, and instead of rushing to the next room, I'd ask them, "Tell me about the best day of your life." The first time I did it with a woman named Mrs. Gable, who had terminal cancer. The nurse on duty gave me a strange look, but Mrs. Gable's face had lit up. She told me about a picnic in 1962. I could almost smell the cut grass and taste the lemonade as she spoke. When she passed away 2 days later, her daughter told me that our conversation was all she'd talked about. She died remembering joy, not pain. That was a medicine I had never known how to prescribe. My relationship with Mr. Samuels changed too. I was no longer his doctor. I was his confidant. He was my guide. He'd tell me more about the other side, not with sadness anymore, but with a quiet sense of wonder. He described it as the difference between seeing a black and white photo of the ocean and actually feeling the warm water and the sun on your skin. "We live in the photograph, Doc," he told me one afternoon. "We think this is all there is, but it's just a faded copy of the real thing." He was teaching me a new language, a language of the soul, and I realized my old question, what was the point, had been answered. The point wasn't to win the fight against death. The point was to help people live and die with love, without fear. But the final piece fell into place the day he was discharged. His family was there, packing his few things. He was weak, but his eyes were clear. He pulled me close, his hand on my arm, his grip surprisingly firm. He looked me straight in the eye. "You have the gift now, Doc," he said, his voice a low whisper. "You've seen past the veil. Now you have to hold the light for the ones who are walking toward it. Don't let them be afraid of the dark, because it's not dark at all. It's full of color." He patted my hand. "You saved my body. Now go save some souls." That was it. That was my new mission. He wasn't just a messenger. He was my first teacher. I started seeing signs everywhere. A patient waking from a coma talking about a beautiful garden. A child who nearly drowned describing a feeling of being held by people made of stars. These stories were all around me, hidden in the sterile corners of the hospital, waiting for someone to listen. I wasn't a mechanic anymore. I was a gatekeeper, a comforter, a student of the greatest mystery of all. I began writing these stories down, not for a medical journal, but for myself. To honor the souls who were sharing their final, most sacred truths with me. I had found my purpose. It wasn't to cheat death, it was to understand life. So let me ask you, if you were given a second chance, a new purpose, would you have the courage to completely change the life you've always known? Subscribe and hit that notification bell, because Mr. Samuel's story was just the beginning. I have so many more to share, and they might just change the way you see everything. That message from Mr. Samuels, it wasn't an ending. It was a key. It unlocked a door and a wall I didn't even know I had built. For 30 years, I thought my job was to fight a war against death. I was a soldier on a losing team, and every loss chipped away a piece of my soul. But I was wrong. I wasn't a soldier. I was a ferryman. My job wasn't to stop the river, but to help people cross it with dignity, with peace, and without fear. That was the life I saved. It was my own. The truth is, we're all walking around with a message inside of us, a piece of a puzzle that someone else needs. A kind word to a stranger, a story shared with a friend, a moment of forgiveness. We're all messengers. We just get so caught up in the noise of our own lives that we forget to listen, and we forget to deliver them. Mr. Samuels lived for another 2 years after that day. He never spoke of that place again, but he didn't need to. He lived with a quiet, peaceful glow. He had delivered his message. He had done his job. And in doing so, he gave me mine. I'm not the same man who stood at that nurse's station, hollowed out and lost. The emptiness is gone, replaced by a profound sense of wonder. I still see life begin, and I still see it end. But now I see the connection between them. I see the beauty in the transition. I listen for the whispers. And I know, with a certainty that goes deeper than science, that the silence isn't an ending. It's just the space between the notes, and it's full of love. So let me ask you this, what message are you carrying that someone else needs to hear? If these are the kinds of stories that speak to you, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because the stories I've collected since that day, they're a reminder that the most extraordinary truths are often found in the quietest moments. And I have so many more to share.